Hello and welcome to episode 6 of the AutoTalk Weekly Wrap. I'm your host, Richard Edwards, and again with me is Matthew Hanson and Graham McDonald. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Morning.
And thanks to everyone who's watching. There's about 37 of you who seem to like to watch this on Facebook, and one person, and give yourself a pat on the back, who watches on YouTube. But look, we're not giving up. We're not going away. Doesn't matter how long it takes to grow a few viewers. We're still going to do this because it's a little bit of fun, you know. It's better than the rest of our boring daily lives, isn't it? Except for apparently when you stumble across Hot Wheels, I think is kind of the thing that you guys are after. Tell us about a Dodge Power Wagon, Graham.
Yeah, 4 a.m, Richard. Yeah, so the dedication to the craft. 4 a.m at a BP Taupo truck stop at 4 a.m buying Hot Wheels online. Could life get any more exciting than that?
Apparently, if you work for Toyota, because, nice segue here, Signature Class has again been awarded New Zealand's most trusted used car brand, making that a hat trick for them. So third successive year. This is from Reader's Digest. I mean, God, Reader's Digest to me is something that was in my parents' toilet when I was a kid. Is it still around?
I'm going to say, who reads Reader's Digest?
Yeah.
Genuine question.
Readers who want to digest, I guess. So more than 50,000 Signature Class cars have been sold by its store network since Toyota New Zealand set up the used car program in 1997, where the second-hand vehicles are selected individually by the brand's procurement team. I mean, when you go out and buy used cars, and I think you're probably the main used car buyer amongst us, Matthew, even though they are very specifically a Honda Type R. Does an award like this really make a difference to you?
When someone makes a Type R Signature Class sub-brand, I'm just there, aren't I? Like first in line. Well, I mean, it's obviously making a big difference for a lot of people. I feel like, I can recall, seeing ads and things for Toyota Signature Class in the 90s, and I'm sure it goes back a little further than that. I part of me wonders, have we ever seen other brands make a similar tilt at a similar product in the past? Do any of them do anything like that at the moment?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, are there any other significant used car brands, I guess?
Yeah, exactly. You hit it. So in terms of a crowded field of competitors, first of all, though, give kudos to Toyota. I think the Signature brand has worked incredibly well for them. And yet it's a really well-recognized used car brand. I think most people in the marketplace for a car, they know about it. They kind of understand, I suppose, what it actually means. It doesn't even really matter the mechanics behind the scenes, as long as you've got a brand up front. And I think kudos to them. It's been really, really successful. In terms of competition against other used car brands, I'm kind of struggling to think about any others that have had any, first of all, that have had a go at it, and secondly, that have had any particular penetration to marketplace. So it's not crowded. If you then look at it and say, well, are individual dealers or dealer chains, is that a brand? There's some pretty successful ones out there as well. But as a standalone product, I think Signature's kind of on its own.
I think you could argue that maybe in the future the AA approved dealer network maybe might get into that space, but no, yeah, I mean Signature Class have kind of got this to their own at the moment. But if we go back into history a little bit, it used to be that all the brands had, virtually every brand had an attempt at doing a kind of a used car thing, particularly when imports were becoming just really strong competition, and they all needed to see if they could get a bite of that. We saw Mazda with their own import operation. We saw a few of them have a go. One notable one was BMW, which had their system. And if you are aware of their current headquarters, well, there's actually soon to be former headquarters in Mount Wellington. They constructed a refurbishment facility in the basement levels of that building. And I had a chat many years ago to the boss of BMW at the time. And what happened was they built that system. They set up all these amazing ways to refurbish these used cars that were coming in from Singapore and Japan and so forth, and their own New Zealand used stock. But what they discovered was that, and I think other new car distributors have found this too, is that new car distributors want to sell new cars. And so they would go and refurbish cars to what was a new standard, and it just became incredibly expensive and incredibly uncompetitive to do. And they decided then to keep the brand, but what they did was put the vehicles out to the dealers because they realized that the dealers knew better what should be refurbished on a car to make it acceptable to the customer, but also still be viable as a used car option. So it was interesting to see they had to learn the lesson that perhaps in some of these cases, the dealers know better. But Toyota obviously over the years has really developed and honed such a good product with Signature Class that they've managed to sidestep those issues.
If you think about it, they're the McDonald's of the car world. So the Toyota system, so to speak. I mean, the fries are cooked for 1 minute and 34 seconds and not 35 seconds. And I think their stock, the way the Signature Class model works, much the same. And it's very much a cookie cutter operation. But then it has to be to protect the Toyota brand to make it as strong as it actually is.
Mm-hmm. Right, moving on to a different class of car. We've got more details on Chery's Down Under revival. Last week it was confirmed that Chinese carmaker Chery was on the hunt for new staff in Australia. Now, a leaked internal company document has offered further details of the brand's return. It says the brand is set to launch its, and hopefully we pronounce this right, a Moda 5 SUV in Australia in October of this year. Will be followed by a pickup, I'm going to say Ute, in 2023, and the Tiggo 8 and Tiggo 7 Pro SUV appearing in 2024. The document states desired Australian retail figures of 30,000 sales, total sales by 2024, 45,000 sales by 2026, and eventually 75,000 sales beyond 2026, which would put Chery behind only Toyota and Mazda over in Australia. Matthew,
did you say it was called the Chery Amodia?
A Moda.
I was going to say, I thought you said Imodium there for a second. I thought somebody in marketing needs to be shown the door.
Give them a second chance, Graham. Give them a second chance.
You'll be off at Bunnings getting a few badge stickers to stick on a few cars and parking lots, Graham. I assume it does seem a bit ambitious. I wrote the story and a few other people messaged me just sort of saying, are those numbers right? Because they're pretty big. You've got. I know that Chery's probably looking at MG and going, oh yeah, we can do that. But there are other. Its own history is fairly scattershot with success in this region. I don't know. I mean, I think it's. I'm curious about how BYD goes because I think that might happen before this, and that might be a better indicator of how they'll go in this part of the world.
The question being is
for a second to that. You just intrigued by how many new brands or recurring brands are coming back to market again? I'm not quite sure if it was the case, say, 2 or 3 years ago, but for a while there in New Zealand, we had one of the highest ratio of brands to market in the world. And it seems to me like we're coming rapidly back to that particular point. Just the number of either new entrants or recurring entrants is staggering.
Well, it's because of the same reason why you're allowed to exist in market, Graham, is that we have a very broad international-based standard system. Australia doesn't have that, so Australia is missing out on brands. And if we look at why we're seeing more growth than perhaps the Chinese stuff, I think China's just finally coming of time. The cars are getting to a quality that is argued more international, and the competition has reached a point in the Chinese market where they're looking overseas. And it'd be interesting to see what Chery does. I think unless Chery goes very electric, then they're going to have less of an impact here than they will in Australia, but they do have an electric platform on the way. And the other aspect with Australia too is they're going to have to be really cheap to get those kind of numbers. I mean, if you go back 25 years, maybe a little bit longer. For a while in Australia, when Hyundai was a relatively fledgling brand, the Accent 1.3 carby hatchback was the top selling car in Australia. It overtook the Commodore and everything because it was cheap. It was $13,000 drive away. And I think for Chery in Australia can bring a reasonable quality SUV at a really, really tight price. It might get the volume, but it might also be better to take a little bit of a slower grind like MG has. MG's grown well in Australia and here, but it's not necessarily blazing up the charts at a great rate. And what they're doing, it seems, is just slowing. Well, not necessarily slowing, but just metering their pace to be able to make sure that their service, their parts, everything else keeps up with the market. So I guess, we'll see. And no word yet, Matthew, on New Zealand and if they'll be coming here or if they'll be using an agent or.
No, at all. Atico's spoken to us, and Atico's local arm has said no comment. So I get the impression that it's most likely going to be led by Cherry themselves. But no word on New Zealand yet. No positions advertised here. But we're always watching.
They're still in talks with all the rest homes to have display models outside.
Oh, stop it, Graham. You know you want to drive an Imodium. Anyway, now
I'll hold it to that name.
The government has put port safety under the spotlight. And this is in the wake of we've seen 2 deaths, sadly, in ports over the last 2 weeks. Workplace Relations and Safety Minister Michael Wood has directed the Transport Accident Investigation Commission to begin an investigation into the recent port facilities fatality, to determine any system-wide lessons to improve safety. Now, I've got to make clear, from what I've seen of the reporting so far, neither of these current deaths are related to vehicle shipments. But for our Transport Talk readers, this is an important one. And also, look, just in general, the ports are a big part of the industry. And I guess we need to make sure that they're running correctly. Now, Auckland Port hasn't had the greatest reputation in the last few years for safety, but then I would argue for the amount of volume they move. I know we don't like trading off lives for volume, but do we think there's something seriously fishy with the way the ports are operating, or have we had a bad run?
I think it's it's not really for us to comment, actually, when we're sort of thinking about it, that human error or human judgment is, by and large, appears to be the issue behind most of the port incidents that are occurring. And whether it's comes to either poor training or it comes down to just operator error, that's a hard call to make. But ports are an incredibly intensive workplace location. If you look at just the sheer number of movements that are occurring at any given point across a very constrained space, and it doesn't whether it's Ports of Tauranga or Littleton or Auckland, there are a few industries where you've got that number of movements and equipment and people and diverse operations happening all at the same time. And it is glib to sort of say, well, that's going to make accidents will happen, because we want to have a zero injury, zero fatality workplace everywhere. But it certainly makes it a really hard model in any industry to work for. And look, I've got complete sympathy with everybody involved in these 2 recent incidents, but a little voice in my head says also that we've also got to be mindful that, yes, this is probably one of New Zealand's most intensive working locations.
Mm-hmm. On to something a little bit nicer. Hayden Paddon is set to develop tuning packages for Hyundai N products. Hyundai New Zealand's performance lineup has grown by 1 with the introduction of the new i20N this week, alongside the new introduction. Rally champion and Hyundai brand ambassador Hayden Paddon announced plans to roll out several new programs aimed at the enthusiast market. That'll be really cool. We haven't seen the local tuning stuff, particularly on cars, in some time. Matthew, you got a chance to have a blast around the track in the new N products. How are they?
Oh, they're pretty good. Yeah. Yeah, so we got quite a generous amount of track time in both the i20N and the i30N. The former's all new for us. The latter's just had a pretty big update. That i20N's quite a solid performer, to the point where, I'm not 100% sure how many people are going to want to add on top of that with tuning products. But, Hyundai talked about, well, specifically Hayden Paddon talked about sort of the need in that market for customization and people wanting to make cars their own. And obviously, Graham in particular, you're probably quite familiar with the thirst around modifying a car and sort of doing things different to what your neighbors are doing. So I think it'll be interesting. Hyundai hasn't really talked about how it's going to be distributed yet. That's, I'm guessing, still sort of coming down the line. But it'll be mostly cosmetic stuff and sort of chassis and suspension tuning and that sort of thing. Not so much sort of power upgrades.
Fantastic. Now, last on the list today is, and not one I'm sure people will be shedding a tears for, the Mitsubishi Express van is set to cease production. The Mitsubishi Express van has become the latest victim of global manufacturing supply constraints, with the Australasian arms of Mitsubishi being advised that production of the short wheelbase versions will cease in May 2022, and no more long wheelbase versions available ex-factory. Mitsubishi Australia says it expects to run at a long wheelbase express stock mid-year, but we have enough supply short wheelbase. I've gotten lost here. We'll have enough supply of the short wheelbase model to maintain sales until the end of 22. Have we heard anything from Mitsubishi New Zealand on this, Matthew?
Not yet. But it's safe to say there may be some sort of connection between the two different markets. It's a bit of a shame because that model hasn't been offered very long in New Zealand at all, and I've seen quite a few of them around. So I get the impression that their sales have been reasonably strong. Obviously, it's not the first time we've seen that model in the news for slightly average reasons. It was handed a 1-star ANCAP safety rating last year, which was quite a sort of debated topic, particularly against the brands who sort of think, well, how valid is ANCAP and how relevant is ANCAP these days, particularly with vans and things like that. But it
was a bit of a controversial rating too in the way it was done, and the fact that at the same time you had the same vehicle out there with a Renault badge on it with a significantly higher rating. I kind of feel like Mitsubishi was opportunistically taken advantage of by ANCAP on that one, and compared to some of the van offerings in the market, it was not necessarily the worst of the offenders, but somehow got the worst tarring. But I guess you've put the question here: is Mitsubishi going to have a replacement in the pipeline? Well, I guess the answer to that is maybe, and it could be a van you're fairly familiar with, Graham. And then, of course, they're now part of the Nissan-Renault alliance, and perhaps we could see a Mitsubishi-badged NV350 back here.
Yeah, well, that'd be interesting to see. I mean, the NV350 has been a pretty solid performer or caravan, but it's just going to sort of take a step backwards and say, poor Mitsubishi have not had a good history in terms of their van marketplace being snatched away from them. The L300, as we all recall, every entry-level tradie in New Zealand bought themselves an L300 because they were cheap, they were good, and they were cheap. No, they weren't technically advanced, but you'd actually argue they were carved out of stone and wood at the factory. But van buyers, particularly just tradies that just need a thing that goes somewhere and then holds lots of things, and then at the end of the day takes all the things back in it again, back to where it starts. That's all anybody wants. And the L300 was perfect. And I think there were quite a few tradies that shed a tear when that thing disappeared off the scene because it was cheap.
In fairness, it had a fairly long run, and that the same basic body shape was in the market. It was still in the market from New Zealand from about 1990 to about 2018.
15, 16, I think it was. It got canned. Yeah. But here's the thing: it didn't. And the little secret was, it still sold. If they were making those things today, they still would have sold them. And I think the Express was quite a neat little successor to that, where, maybe there's a bit of questions over safety and things like that. Although you just pointed out some very salient markers about the Renault product, but it served a point. It was a cheap, entry-level, affordable van for a tradie. It was sold at lots of different stores around the country, so if you bought one, you knew you could get servicing. The Mitsubishi servicing brand was good, and so tradies could buy these things instead of maybe a more expensive brand, and they knew it would do the job. I'm a little bit sad for them. I think they've probably been done a little bit here, and I think it's a bit of a gap in the marketplace as a result.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see Nissan vans come here with Mitsubishi badges. Look, Nissan New Zealand doesn't seem to have much interest in the van market, but Mitsubishi obviously has that long amount of history there. They managed to bridge. Exactly. They've survived the gap between the exit of the L300 and the arrival of the Express. They're going to be pushing harder for Japan to get an NV350 and an NV200 with a Mitsubishi badge. And certainly the latter does exist, and I would be surprised if the former doesn't come soon. And the NV350 is a good van, and it has stability control, and it has airbags. You've shifted a few, Graham. You're happy with them?
Yeah, and they're good. And actually, as you know, and I've written about it in my columns, there's been quite a number of new NV350s coming into New Zealand via Japan, where they are coming in as either fleet overruns or dealership overruns, coming to New Zealand, providing a viable financial alternative in that used marketplace. So if you were the distributor of such product here, you'd think to yourself, well, if the importers can do it, why can't I do it? And I think you're spang on. I wouldn't want to guarantee it, but I think there's definitely a market niche there.
Well, Reece at Mitsubishi Motors New Zealand, there you go. We're giving you a few ideas. I'll You send us the
top
check
tips.
once you've got that into the market and making bank off it. So look, thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget to you can go back and look at this on YouTube or Facebook at any time, and we will be back with you again next Friday. Hopefully not from a car, but probably from a car at 10 a.m. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, Graham.
Have a great Friday. Poor Richard, you were very today.